Hey everyone, Nathan Long here, president of Saybrook University. Welcome to another episode of Saybrook Insights. About 2 years ago, everywhere in California seemed to be on fire. North, south, middle of the state, down the street, everywhere. And while my family had avoided the worst of these in previous years, our house at this point was in the beeline of what they called the Bobcat fire here in Southern California. By the time we evacuated, you could see smoke and fire just over the foothills, threatening many of the homes, including ours, throughout the area. In the end, we got out safely, and most of the homes throughout were spared, including the famous Mount Wilson Observatory, which is right up the way from us. What was abundantly clear is that the heroes during that experience were firefighters. These men and women, wow, incredible. I found myself several times, and even today, just being overwhelmed with deep gratitude for what they do and the sacrifices they make to do all they can to keep our properties and lives secure. I mean, imagine this. After extensive training, they jump into action really without complaint. They get the job done. And sometimes they pay with their lives. And this is a level of dedication similar to those in the armed forces that desire to preserve, protect, and defend, often, again, with the potential greatest of consequences to life, limb, and mental health. Now, given all this, just like with every aspect of American life, our firefighters were at one point in time segregated, and just like all other segregated areas of our society, the period of desegregation would not come easily, nor without pain, especially for our Black fellow citizens. Enter Dr. Portia Rawles, who, along with being an outstanding psychologist, just wait until you hear the amazing things she's doing in her community and beyond. She's a faculty member here at Saybrook. She's also a former firefighter who reached the rank of captain and is author of the book, Sisters in the Fire, a powerful book detailing the untold, now told stories of several women responsible for opening up the U.S. Fire Service. We talk quite a bit in our interview about the various struggles that she herself experienced and the very real structural racism and sexism that was very prominent there. The stories that Dr. Rawles opens for the first time to the public gives us insights into these women's lives and the continued struggle to serve our nation, to serve us in their fullest capacity as human beings, all of whom just desired to give their time, their lives, for others. I can't wait to dig into this and other topics related to Dr. Rawls' life and work to date. She's a powerhouse, and we're honored to have her here on Saybrook Insights. All right, let's get to it with Dr. Portia Rawles. Dr. Portia Rawles, thank you for joining me today on Saybrook Insights. It is truly an honor. We had a moment to chat just before we got started here. I'm very excited about this. Come on now, like you're a retired firefighter and captain, the first African-American woman to achieve that in Norfolk. You're an author. You're a licensed psychologist. You're a critical incident stress debriefer. You're forensic evaluation of sexually abused youth, EMDR, competency to stand trial evaluation, parenting capacity. What don't you do? Oh my God, it's so impressive. So fill us in about Dr. Rawles and give us a little bit of your personal history relating to your academic and professional life and how you found your way to Saybrook University.
So I've been practicing now as a psychologist about 20 years. That's my second career. Before then, I spent 13 years, as you talked about, in the fire service and retired in about 2000 as a captain and segue into being a clinical psychology. And really, my fire service background led me to really focus on trauma. And initially, I was working with public safety departments trying to do consultation on mental health, particularly with the fire service, because they were really light years behind at that time compared to law enforcement. And then from there, interesting enough, when I finished my internship, my university that I had gotten my doctorate invited me back to become a professor, become initially a clinical instructor and do my residency. And then they moved me into assistant professorship position. And that's where I stayed for 7 more years teaching which I later found out is very rare to go into teaching in a doctoral program newly graduated. I didn't quite understand the privilege of that opportunity until later, and when I got more versed in academia, more knowledgeable about academia. But stayed there 7 years and did a lot of work with my doctoral students there, training them in trauma. I actually designed the first course they ever had in that department for trauma. And also during that time, I started my private practice, which continues today. And that's been now 20 years.
It's pretty thriving, isn't it?
Oh we have about we just recently hired some new people, so we have about 38 or 40 clinicians.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So yeah, it's thriving quite a bit. Yeah, it's huge. I mean, it's a large practice, and we do a lot of different things at the practice. We don't just do traditional therapy, but we do management. We have other therapists that are licensed at EMDR, but the practice is still based on the origins of me starting it to really address trauma and the trauma that we see with people and being trauma. Initially, the term was trauma informed, now it's trauma responsive. But that's what I started the practice, and I also, my catalyst or my motivation for starting the practice was to make sure that the poor and persons of color had access to quality mental health. So that continues to be somewhat of our driving force. We have far expanded beyond that now. 20 years later, we just recently opened, actually, because of some of the needs in the community, we just recently opened urgent care for behavioral health because we saw this gap where some people were not severe enough to really go to a psychiatric hospital, but they're too much in crisis to really go to your traditional outpatient. So we try to fill that gap with that particular service line.
Well, then how'd you find your way to Saybrook? I want to come back to that in a minute because this little thing called a mental health crisis in America right now.
Yes, it is.
How did we get you? That is awesome. How did Saybrook land you?
I don't know if this is well, I'll just be very transparent. My last teaching assignment, let's just say they had some challenges with the Department of Education. I'll leave it at that. That's a nice way of saying that. So they ended up having to do a massive layoff. And I was one of the professors that got laid off. And I later found out I got laid off because I was the highest paid professor in that department. So I just decided I wasn't going to teach anywhere else until I found somewhere that I fit. Because I always felt like I was kind of a peg, what they call it, a square peg in a round hole at the places I taught, because I'm very much about application and implementing clinical psychology. And a lot of the places I had taught in the past were really into the research, and I don't have a problem. I mean, research is valuable and it's needed, but for me, I've always focused more on the practitioner side of clinical psychology, and I also practice on the social justice advocacy side of clinical psychology. And so, interesting enough, I had never heard of you guys say Brooke, and I was on the computer writing a psych eval, and this email popped up from higher ed saying, "Hey, this job is open." Would you be interested in applying? And I began to read about you guys, and I've been reading now us. And the thing that struck me was the mission statement and the emphasis on social justice and practical application. And so I attempted to apply, and my application kept not bouncing back. And so I left. I had at that time I had planned on, we were getting ready to go on vacation. We were going to go to Sicily. So I went to Sicily, spent 10 days, and came back, and I was sitting at the computer, and I heard, "Hey, why don't you try to apply again?" And that time, application went right through. No problems.
It was all fate, right there.
Hey, a little soon after that, I got a call from Ethiopia, and that's where we stand, and that's how it all happened.
Wow. Well, we always good to get that feedback on our HR applications. So
I think it was just something. I feel like I really do, and I'm not saying this just to be kind of corny, but I really do feel like I was supposed to be at Saybrook, and it's one of the first places that I've taught at. It's actually the only place that I taught at that I felt like I fit.
that's awesome. And we could do more in academia to kind of spread the wealth too in that area, because I think so often it's cloistered off from a lot of folks, in general.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, good, 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 good. So I want to lean into this. I'm so impressed. I guess I reviewed your website and I was really excited. You have so many things going on, and in your practice, I did not realize it was so big. I don't know how you do it. Like, that's impressive. But one of the values of, our values is to support faculty who are practitioners who are really out there doing the work they're doing. And I guess, kind of kicking it off, we're in such a mental health crisis right now in the United States. I don't know what I'd love to hear your opinions on what you think the acuteness of it is. How do we lean into getting through this crisis as a country, within your community and other communities? What are your thoughts around that, where psychology, counseling, and other therapeutic careers?
That's a big question. I feel like it's going to be several years. This is not going to be a 1 or 2 year type of thing. I think we're going to see between COVID and now the financial challenges people are facing, all of the death and grief and loss, not just loss of family members and loved ones, but loss of the way our life was prior to COVID. I mean, yeah, we're kind of getting back, but it's still not the same. And I don't think it'll ever be the same. And so, with that being said, I just really feel like we have to make it as easy as possible for people to access mental health. And what I mean by that, we have to remove as many barriers as possible. So you have to remove the financial barriers. If people don't have insurance, then what are going to be their options if they come through your doors to service them? If they don't have transportation, then are you going to be able to do virtual and telehealth with them? Or are you going to offer some options for transportation? I know recently in my practice, one of my clinicians came up with the idea because we have quite a number of clients that use Medicaid transportation, and sometimes that's not the best. And so she's writing a grant now that we can partner with Lyft and Uber to provide rides for people when they're having transportation challenges. That's just a small example. Also, if you don't have any clinicians or therapists trained in trauma right now, you need to send them to get their CEUs or whatever and how to treat that, because really that's what's coming through our doors. People are probably more so than I've ever seen are traumatized by everything they've been through in the last couple of years with COVID, and they're at a more severe level. And what we were noticing, unfortunately, is that it's getting harder to de-escalate people because they are in such crises and their mental health challenges are so severe. It takes more work to bring them down and to begin to stabilize them so you can begin to do the work. And forgive me, I'm recovering from a cold, but that is what we're seeing. So one of the things is that if you do have a private practice, you're going to have to increase your staffing. We have tripled in the last 3 years in staffing. I still don't have enough therapists to meet the need. I'm literally hiring somebody every week to that has the heart of our practice to try to meet the need of the communities. The other thing too is we don't turn people away. That's our policy. So if you have insurance or don't have insurance, we don't turn you away. We'll figure it out. If we got to do pro bono, we'll do pro bono. But if we need to walk you through, we have some social workers on staff, and we brought them on staff because we realized quickly that we needed case management with some of the things we were facing now that are walking through our doors. So if we have to help that person walk through getting some type of insurance, because I'm in Virginia and we're a Medicaid expansion state, so insurance is available. So what I'm seeing is that we have to do the traditional clinical services, but there's a lot of case management services now that we're having to bring under our roof to really meet the needs. I mean, we're having to deal with housing. We're having to deal with people don't have food. We're having to deal with people don't have jobs and they don't know how they're going to pay their bill. So we have this long list of resources, all these other organizations that we have learned and collaborate with and partner with, that we can say, okay, we need you to go here, or we're going to make this call and we're going to send you over here or over there to try to see if your needs can be met. So it's a little bit different approach, but I think it really aligns with a humanistic approach, which for me is not just about the mutual respect and care, but also about the advocacy and social justice. So that's what I feel needs to happen. If you're going to be a regular 9 to 5 traditional outpatient practice, I think you're going to have some challenges with what we're facing today with this mental health crisis.
So in short, we need people to, wherever they can, to step up and step into rethinking the way their practices are designed, opening things up, figuring that out. Let me ask you this, though, because I had a psychologist on a while back who was really talking through, okay, that works for some, and it may be working for you, but then, if I'm taking on so many people who are not Medicare eligible or I can't get reimbursements, I can't pay myself for the time and the work that I'm doing and feed my own self and my kids and that kind of thing. What are your thoughts around that? How do you kind of take care of both the therapist and the community?
It's a delicate balance. We have a lot of residents and we have some interns that help us. Okay, because now residents, we're one of the few practices we do pay our residents because I think it's just exploitive to have people do all that work and not pay them. But they're not getting paid like the salary of a licensed person. So we use some of our doctoral students who are third and fourth year doctoral students at the practice. We use our master level students who are internship who are they've most of them have been with us since practicum, so they have been very well trained in trauma and a variety of techniques to help us meet the load, that it doesn't cause us to go financially under, because you're correct. I'm constantly having to balance how much can I give away, but I still have to keep the lights on and make sure everyone's paid. So that's how we meet some of those challenges with that.
Okay, that's very helpful. And I think I don't want to put you out there as someone to consult with, but if you want to talk to someone who's growing leaps and bounds, Dr. Rawls is oh my gosh, it's incredible. And you're doing a great service to your community, for your community. That's what this is about, which I think is really fabulous. So thank you for that. That's great. So as you look at kind of the scope of practice right now, and you're talking about trauma, how did you say it? Not trauma informed, but
Trauma responsive.
trauma responsive. I've heard that used a lot, and I guess I'll go this way. Tell me what that means. So, like, if someone,
Okay.
how is that an add-on that's going to be beneficial? I mean, I think I know, but would love to hear it.
So the old term trauma informed, what they realized is that a lot of organizations were trauma informed, meaning they had knowledge about trauma, they understood it, they understood the principles, the theories, but they weren't utilizing the knowledge and they weren't implementing it when they were working with people. So they switched to being trauma responsive, which means that you're going to take your knowledge that you have about traumatic stress and trauma and how to treat it and all of that, and you're actually going to implement it as you're working with people and working with communities.
Okay, I got you. So it just helps you. It helps the clinician apply those skills that they've learned in a more effective way for their client base. Is that fair?
Yes, yes.
Well, let me ask you this then about trauma. My wife's in a counseling program, and we've talked about big T, little t trauma, and I wasn't trying to be flip here with the question, but I said everyone seems to have trauma.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's exactly what she says. She's like, "Yeah, with the program, man. Like you have trauma. Like I have trauma. We all have trauma." There are some out there who are saying that we're ginning up the trauma side of the equation. That older kind of mindset that rub a little dirt on it, let's get moving, stop whining, stop complaining. Can you talk to that mindset a little bit and what we're trying to do with this different approach?
Yeah, and I'm very familiar with that because that's what I face and that's what I continue to face when I go work and move about in fire service community. So it's the suck it up mentality. So you got hurt, just suck it up and keep moving. What I found, that'll work for a little while, but eventually, as the different events and things you experience and you haven't really dealt with the first thing, so a second thing gets piled on, and eventually you get a person that what I'm seeing a lot of recently since COVID is people dealing with complex trauma. So people were already dealing with past traumas from life and childhood and everything else. And now this is being piled on top. And they were doing pretty good. They were functioning. They were taking care of their families to a point. They weren't the most healthiest person, but they weren't the worst off either. But when these new events happen, they just begin to spiral. And that's what I'm seeing a lot of that's walking through our doors as a practice. And I think there's a balance there. It's not an either or. I think even when you're doing treatment and you're working with clients, one of the things you have to be mindful of is you're constantly walking this balance of, okay, I know you went through these traumatic events, but also how do we help you to move forward and heal from that? So it's not about just we're going to sit here and just lament and talk about this for 2 years, and we're not going to try to bring a healing process that you can begin to thrive again in your life. So I think it's a both. And in some instances, I'm gonna be honest with you, when I first started treating trauma and working with people that were dealing with trauma, I used to think everybody had to tell me all of their deep dark, details of what they had gone through, and they had to actually deal with the trauma and we had to face it. And what I've learned over the years is that some that doesn't work for everybody. Some people would tell you, I'm good. I don't need to deal with that, doc. I know it happened. This is what I want to accomplish in life. And so that's the way we move. And they accomplish their goals and they move on. So I had to learn that as I've gotten older, and I've been doing this for 20 years. Sometimes I mean, I've had veterans that have dealt with some pretty horrific stuff, and it's like, don't want to revisit that. I know it's there. I know it impacts me to a point, but this is what I want. This is how I want to move forward, and they are able to do so.
But even in that, right, they're kind of consciously compartmentalizing where
Yes.
so you've even pulled that out of them to say, okay, I'm going to have the agency to put it over here. I mean, that seems kind of movement. And
Yeah. And it works for them. And now my earlier years of practice, I'm going to say, oh no, that's dysfunctional. I got to make you talk about this. Now it's like, okay, if that works for you and you're doing, and I mean, I'm thinking about so many of my clients that have taken that approach. And I mean, it's their session and it's their healing process. So I have to respect that. One of them that I'm thinking about in general is doing amazing. And that was the approach they wanted to take.
so, I mean, that's kind of the quintessential humanistic approach that you're implementing right there.
Oh, yeah.
You spoke really beautifully about, the importance of therapists stepping up and into where is education in all this? I mean, there's all this scuttlebutt right now with APA. They're starting to, what some would say, go back to the old way of doing things by everything's got to be on ground with some exception to online. There's some really interesting developments here. Where do you think we can go better or do better in the education front on that side of things?
I really think our students really need to be skilled in doing telehealth. Telehealth is not going away. All right. I know when we had to, my governor shut down our entire state, so I shut down my practice for 60 days. It was like crickets. There was nobody in the building, and we all had to revert to telehealth. And of course, our clients were kicking and screaming, talking about, I hate this, and counseling appointments. But now it's become they love it. And what I've found is that you can reach so many more people. We have a mixture now of face-to-face and telehealth. You can reach so many more people when you have telehealth as an option. So that's the first thing I think we need to do, educate. We need to make sure they're well trained in that. I've already talked about them being trained in trauma. And then also, one of the speakers at our last residential conference, and I forgot to mention that it's something we're doing in the practice. How do they actually go out and implement community interventions? We had started a nonprofit arm. We're getting ready to bring it officially and legally up under the practice. And the reason why, because there was so much work we were doing in the community, and we felt like, okay, we need to figure out how to tie this together with the traditional private practice. So I also feel like students need to have some knowledge, which is why I'm always trying to offer some type of workshop about how to actually set up a structure. So it's great, you've been trained as a therapist, as a psychologist, you have all this clinical training, but then how do you actually set up a legal structure to actually reach business into the community? And, I heard a saying many years ago, you could be a great baker, but doesn't mean you can run a bakery. Okay, so that is a piece that I really feel like we need to focus on so that they can, because you have to have a structure. You just can't go out there willy-nilly and just show up. There has to be some type of structure. And what I've learned from being at Saybrook, a lot of our students have pretty unique and very innovative interventions. And for most of them, they may try to fit that into a current organization, but most of them are going to need to start some type of entity to run that and fuel that. And so I feel like they need to have some knowledge about that.
Oh, that's very good. So those are two big ones, getting the telehealth training and the education, and then how to run your practice, how to build it, how to market it, all those things. Yeah. Want to shift gears here. So for those who don't know, you got to read her bio. Dr. Rawles has like a million different like awesome things in her career. One is firefighter and captain. So, like, I'm an inquiring mind. I need to know, like, what was this like? I have some friends whose parents were in it, and it's intense. I mean, like, it's not for the faint of heart. Tell me about how you got into it. What inspired you, and like from your training to your profession. What all went into that for you?
Well, I'm gonna be honest with you. I wish I had this wonderful story, but like most persons that get into, particularly African American women, that those of us who first came into fire service, we was just trying to feed ourselves and find a career. For me, I was a fine arts major in undergrad, and so one of the things my professors drilled into our heads was that whatever you do, find some type of job that pays the bills but allows you to do your art, to paint as many hours, to draw as many hours or whatever. And so I saw the ad in the paper for the position, but there's some, I don't know how quite I found out, but I found out you only work 9 days out of the month. And I was like, wow, that gives me 21 days to paint and draw. And I was working at a museum at the time, and I hated it. I hated being indoors because I had been involved in athletics and in sports all of my life, and I just hated sitting inside of an office building. And so I went and applied. I knew nothing about the fire service. I don't know if it really dawned on me that you had to run into burning buildings, but I was like, okay, it's outdoors, it's physical. You can use all of your, you can be out there. Everything you like to do, you can be active. You're not sitting in a building, whatever. And lo and behold, I didn't know at the time that my department, they were getting ready to be sued by the Justice Department for their application process being discriminatory against women. And unfortunately, I didn't know it at the time, but and the particular part was the agility test, because you're required to do this pretty strenuous physical interest exam. You have to do that, then you have to do a written exam, then you have to pass a background check. They actually went out to California to my undergrad university and researched me. I mean, it's intense process. Then you got to do a polygraph. Yeah, all of that before you ever get hired.
For firefighting, or is this public service in general? I mean,
Public service in general. Okay, so it's a tense process. So if there's anything in your background, they're going to find it. So needless to say, I did pass the agility test. So that kind of ended the lawsuit that the women had against them. But at that time, I had just graduated from college. I was on the rowing team, the crew team. The level of physical fitness I was at was incredible.
best shape of your life.
Best shape of my life. So I got hired and went into the academy, and the journey began. So that's how I was the only woman in the academy. There was 20 something of us at that time, and I was the only female in the academy. At that time, the academy, I think, was about 3 months. Now it's about 5 or 6 months because you get trained as a medic as well now in most fire departments. It's much longer. But at my time, when I went into fire department, we were only doing firefighting. While I was in there, we merged with our EMS department. So that started my journey. It was intense. If you ever read my book, there were some good times and some bad times in the academy. I met some guys that really supported me, and I met some that didn't really want me there. But it's an intense. And I tell people they train you to ignore your pain. That's intentional. They put you in situations where you are physically hurting and you have to push yourself to get past that, because there may be a time when we're in a structure that you're going to have to push yourself to save your life. They train you, obviously it's paramilitary, so they train you don't question orders because that can get you killed. And they also really put you in environments where, it's kind of like boot camp. For the military, where they're constantly, some of the stuff that they did, I was like, what in the world does this got to do with, as I began to learn more about firefighting? But they were really trying to push us to physical exhaustion and then see could we still think and function and move and do what we needed to do. I understood more of it when I got into the station and started responding to calls, why they did that. And then later on in my career, I was a training officer for about 2 or 3 years. So I got to see that side of some of the things of why we train people. And they train you to think you're invincible. That's the other piece of the training. Because you can't be scared. If you're scared, you're not going to run into the building. You're not going to, you're going to run the other way. So they really train you to believe I can go into one of the most hostile, austere, physical environments and come out alive. That's the mindset that they train you. So I tell somebody, even though it was a rough time with the fire service, I don't regret going in. And a lot of what I learned in that training, I've applied in the rest of my life. Yeah, just how to deal with challenges, adversity, hardship, difficulty. I don't think with some of the things I've dealt with, I would have been able to survive had I not gone through that process with the fire department.
Do you think that, well, I have a couple follow-ups on this, if you don't mind. I'm fascinated. From mental health and wellness perspective, it sounds like that's pretty counter to what we would
Oh, absolutely.
like. How do you reconcile that? Like, not you personally, but like, how do these men and women take care of themselves?
That is the $1 million question. That is something that my entire career as a psychologist that I have been on the soapbox preaching and saying you guys have to take care of yourself because many of them don't. A lot of them use, unfortunately, alcohol to numb. Because you see so much, people don't realize the fire department responds to every 911 call out there. There's nothing we don't respond to. Think about that. If it's a bombing, if it's a car accident, we're there on scene. And a lot of times we're the first ones that have to try to mitigate that situation and deal with whatever the emergency is. So a lot of them don't take care of themselves. In the last couple of years, I've seen more of a push from the national level on down that mental health is becoming a priority in the fire service. And unfortunately, that's been pushed because there's so many firefighters committing suicide. There's more firefighters that die from suicide than die from line of duty deaths right now. And that's really because mental health has not been pushed. It's been stigmatized. If you go to a counselor in the fire service, like law enforcement, is a very closed community. So a lot of times they don't feel like they can go to a typical therapist who hasn't been a firefighter that can understand what they've gone through. The other piece about it is that being a firefighter is more than just a job. For many, it's their identity. And unfortunately, sometimes that profession is actually causing, like you talk about, a lot of the mental health challenges. But I've had firefighters come to me after going to other therapists, and the first thing the therapist said, "Well, you need to quit your job." That's like number one, no, don't say that. Okay, to them, that's like death. So I'm seeing some push. Matter of fact, next month I have to do a presentation at a conference about mental health, a fire service conference, and I just did one about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So I'm seeing more openness to it because we're losing so many to suicide or alcoholism or drug addictions. And so they're really realizing, hey, we have to do something different here, or we're not going to have anybody in these departments. And what we're also finding, the younger generation of firefighters, they're more willing to seek out mental health care. They're more willing to say, I got a problem, I need some help. Whereas more of the older ones were brought up in the system or the culture, you just suck it up. So that is a shift we're seeing. I'm hoping that one day, I had thought about it, but I just, I got so much I'm doing. But I'm really hoping one day that someone would start what they call like a fire, like we have police psychologists, that we would start a fire psychologist program to train psychologists specifically to service fire departments.
Saybrook University needs to start. You got my vote. That's awesome. We used to have like a cop doc program, for
Oh,
example,
wow.
here. I don't know if you knew.
No.
It was before my time and your time, but it's one of those things that I think we probably need now more than ever is something around first responders and what they do. I was talking to my mom a while back. I mean, when I was a little kid, we had a good family friends of ours wiped out in a car accident. She worked for the city, and the firefighters who responded and the EMTs who responded to that were so. That's one incident, right? So I'm not trying to minimize the whole scope of it, but I just go back to think about they had to see that in real time, all the horror of that situation. And I can't think, like, you pancake one event after another, to your point. Like, it's understandable why that trauma just can be unwieldy.
Yeah, they're very good at compartmentalizing. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't care who you are, myself included. The person I was before I went into the fire department versus the person I am now is not the same person. That the job will change you. The question is, how is it going to change you? You know, a lot of them get to the point that they just numb. You learn to turn off your feelings. You know, I just share this as a self disclosure just to tell you how intense it was. I think it was about 2 years after I had been out of the fire department. And I was going down the highway, and there had been it was a hit and run situation. Someone had been hit by a car. It was obvious they were dead because they had the white sheet and all the typical stuff, you know, that from those of us in the industry know what that means. That was the first time I could remember having any significant feelings from seeing something like that. It was like all of these feelings, emotions rushed up, and I was like, what the heck is this? You know, I actually felt sorrow. I felt grief for the person. I was thinking about their family. And it had been about 2 years of me being, and it took that long for me to turn off that ability to turn your emotions off so that you can respond and help people, because you can't be all emotional. You know, people are with the stuff, you just can't. It's impossible to do. It's one or the other. Either you're not going to survive and you're going to leave a department, or you're going to learn to turn those emotions off to help the citizens or of the city or the municipality that you're working for. So, I mean, that's just a small example. And I have friends still that have been firefighters for 30 years, and you know they've done disaster response. I was on the team for a little while, then I stepped back because I just felt like I had seen enough. But some of them, they've been to about every major disaster that you've seen on the news. They've been there.
Oh, wow. That's heavy.
That's heavy. Yeah. Yeah. I'm hopeful and more inspired that I'm seeing more and more firefighters call this our office, and I'm seeing more and more even from the national. So the IFF is the union for the fire service. They're like the one of the second largest labor unions in the country, one of the most powerful, and they're starting to push mental health.
It's about time, right? It's important. You also elevated to captain. That's pretty awesome. And you were the first African American woman in Norfolk to get that done. What was the process for you in achieving that?
So you have to be on the, at that time, you had to have been on the department for, I think, 3 or 4 years. I had been on for 7 years when I decided to go for captain. You had to take a written exam, and it's about 10 or 15 books. Fire service has like their own kind of library of books for all the different things we have to be trained to do. The exam is based on those books, and it can, and I mean, it's everything. You know, everybody thinks, oh, you're just running a burning building, but there is a science. It's called fire science. There is a science to what we do. So you had to take the exam, you had to score. In my department, you had to score within the top 10 on the exam. And then from there, you do what they call an assessment center, which is a lot of administrative. They actually bring chiefs in from across the country. You have all these tasks from organizing, you know, administrative duties that you would normally have to deal with for the day, how you're going to organize them, to actually they give you a mock fire scene scenario. You take command of the scene and you have to tell what you would do, why you would do it, what was your expectations for those orders or whatever action you took. You had to deal with problem employees. I mean, it was like all of these things you would deal with as an officer. They put in this assessment center, and the chief officers, the assessors, they bring are literally sitting there watching you while you do this. Okay, and they're marking and grading you and scoring you and all of that. And so then after you do that, you do the assessment center, the scores are combined, and you have the ranks on the list. And then based on the number of positions available, you're selected. So I believe I ranked first on the written test, and I forgot what I ranked on the assessment, but I know on the final listing I was like second or third, so I got promoted. So that's how that happens.
That's great. So you were a barrier breaker. How was, just briefly, like, what was that experience like? I mean, we could probably spend a whole podcast on that, I bet.
Ooh, that's a loaded question, Nathan. Okay, I talk about this in my book, but I was promoted to captain, and as you said, I was the first African American woman ever to hold that position. And then one thing you have to understand about my department, we're the third oldest department in the nation.
No kidding.
Yeah, so there's a saying in the fire service. It used to be 150 years when I was there. Now it's 200 years of tradition unimpeded by progress. Think about that. Okay, they put that on t-shirts and they wear it proudly. So, needless to say, there were a lot of folks that weren't happy about me being promoted to captain. In particular, my chief officer. Departments are broken up into battalions. Sometimes they refer to them as districts. And my battalion chief did not think that I was qualified to be a captain. So my first day as a captain, he made me ride in the jump seat, which is where the firefighters ride. He wouldn't let me take command of the piece of apparatus. And so at first I was lieutenant. So that happened when for me was a lieutenant. So they wouldn't let me take command of my apparatus or my piece that I was supposed to be in command of. And they allowed a firefighter to take command until they thought I was qualified to take command. So that was what happened to me because I had to go through the lieutenant before I became captain. When I became captain, they still wasn't happy. They didn't do much, couldn't do much about it, but they still wasn't happy I'd been promoted. So what they did was, in most fire departments, there's always one station that everybody hates to go to. It's called like the problem child of the department. So what they did was they sent me to this particular station, and then they transferred all the renegades of the department, all the troublemakers, into that station on my shift.
Oh, wow.
But what I found, the gentleman that when they transferred them, and what I found was that they weren't really troublemakers; they were independent thinkers. And a lot of them had been in the fire department before I was even born. Okay. So I just had a conference and a meeting with them and said, basically, I'm going to treat you as adults, until you show me that I have to do otherwise. I acknowledged that most of them had been fighting fire before I was even born. So you have a wealth of, experience and knowledge. And that when we get on fire scenes or we get on emergency scenes, I'm going to let you go. And I will only pull your coattail if I think you're getting ready to do something dangerous. And they appreciated that. I'm going to be honest with you, that last assignment was probably my best time in the fire service. That crew was very loyal to me. We just jived. They respected that I was willing to acknowledge their experience. I was willing to acknowledge the vast knowledge of firefighting they had. And they highly respected that. Matter of fact, I remember we were on one fire scene. It was the first scene I commanded as a captain, and every chief in the department showed up on the scene to see if I was going to do anything wrong, which is unheard of. Basically, you only have your battalion chief, but assistant chiefs, fire, everybody showed up. I remember my crew coming out, and they were so angry because they knew what it was about. They were renegades, so they didn't have a problem about going to toe to authority or nothing. That's just who they were as people. But I was able to calm them down, told them, "Don't worry about it. I got this. Just keep doing your job." But the fact that they were willing to go to bat for me because they understood the racism and the discrimination that I was facing spoke volumes to me. But that was my first introduction to being a captain.
Great illustration too, right? Of like, here we are debating whether structural racism exists, whether racism exists, structural sexism exists. You've just given the whole
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
3 minute overview of here it is. This is what's happened, and what's happening.
And unfortunately, there's still departments across the country that they're either just hiring their first woman or their first person of color. That's still happening all across the nation. We had it a little rougher because we were the first and second wave of African American women to integrate the fire service. So the first woman wasn't hired until 1976. I was hired in 1987, but still it was so few of us in the departments across. I remember when I made captain, there was about 6 African American women captain in the nation. We all knew each other. That's how few of us.
The first woman came in 1976. Is that what you were saying? So not even 50 years.
First African American woman, yeah. So it's still a lot of firsts. There's still a lot of barriers that's being broken in the fire service, and unfortunately, it's still considered, basically, your American white male profession. That's still the culture, and they're still struggling with diversifying and trying to understand that they're going to have to diversify. It's gotten a little better, but it's still there's still, unfortunately, I have a friend of mine who's considered like a content expert in EEO and diversity and all of that, and does a lot of work in the fire. He's always sending me articles and emails about this particular department that just unfortunately has is being sued or has done something really. But you're thinking 2022, they should know better, but they don't. They don't. So I mean, you kind of laugh like, is this 2022 or is this 1917 or something? Because some of the stuff is just kind of outlandish that's happening. But yeah, so that was my time in the fire service, but it wasn't all of my time. I mean, I have a couple of friends, and I have one particular friend who's like a brother to me. He's still in the fire service. So I made some really, really good friends, had some mentors. I feel like my administration and leadership came from a couple of my mentors in the fire service who brought me up, actually opened the doors for me to sit on certain state committees and different things, and just raised me up as far as administration and leadership.
That is wonderful. And you wrote a book called Sisters in the Fire. And we're running a little short on time here, but if you could give our collective audience out there just a overview of this, because it's really cool. It's a history person. I'm so excited. I've got it on order at Amazon, so I'm going to get it.
Okay. So I realized that the stories of the first and second wave of African American women who integrated the fire service, that story had never been recorded. And so for me, the book was a way of actually capturing these stories before these women passed on, because some of them are kind of up in age. So what I went back and did was I reached out to those that I knew, and then some that I knew actually gave me more people. It's about 9 women that I interviewed from different parts of the country. I was fortunate enough to interview the first African American fire chief in the nation. At that time, she was having some health challenges, but she was still alive. So I just felt, to me, that was the greatest blessing of the book, that I was able to interview her and get her story. Most of the women were either the first in their departments, some of them were the only woman in the department, period, regardless of ethnicity. But just telling their stories and some of the challenges and even some of the lessons that they went through in joining the fire departments in their various communities. And for me, it was just to capture the history. Since that time, everybody was like, oh, you should try to turn this into a movie or a book. I was like, I don't know how to do that. But, I was able to connect with some people, and we have written the script, and we are shopping it around, because I just think that history needs to be captured. Because I see a lot of the women now when I'm riding around, and I see a lot of the women in my community, particularly if I see African American women in the fire engine, and I'm like, well, okay, do they really know what those of us who went through, what did we go through to get that door open for them to be able to walk in?
And to give agency, space, place, a face with this profession, right? I mean, that's wow.
And I still do some work with, I still get calls now. I won't name the different departments, but I still have women reaching out to me who are dealing with things, and just reaching out for, okay, so how did you handle this? How did you get through this? What did you do? And so unfortunately, I still have to have some of those conversations with people.
Probably we will for the foreseeable future, I would imagine.
Yeah.
You're awesome on all levels. That's great. Sisters in the Fire. You can find that, I think, in all online and
Amazon.
Amazon for sure. So take a look, take a peek. So we got to close out, unfortunately. This is always the sad part for me, because I literally could talk to you for another hour and a half, 2 hours. You have such a rich history and experience set. So the 3 questions I have, and so these are quick takes. So I'm going to lean in. Feel free to, this is Dr. Portia Rawles wisdom moments that we're going to have. So for new students thinking about, or prospective students thinking about a career in clinical psychology, what are 2 or 3 pieces of advice you give them?
First thing I would give them is to have some kind of idea what you're going to do with the degree, because you're going to need that at certain points of the degree program. Because what I say about a doctoral program, and I'm a professor now, that we give you more work than you're capable of doing, and we expect you to do it because we're training you to be an expert. So have an idea of you may not have it fully, but what you want to do with that degree, because that goal will push you through those hard times when you're ready to give up. And if you can, find a mentor, find someone to It may be in the faculty or it may be a psychologist in your community that can help guide you and direct you.
I love that. All right. That's great. All right. Quick take number 2. What does the term humanistic mean to you?
Well, what I talked about earlier, I believe it means promoting an environment of caring for people and mutual respect for people. But I also believe that that has to encompass addressing the social justice ills that those persons are facing, also being multicultural, and also being an advocate when you can for those persons.
Awesome. All right. And the last big one, the 3 major takeaways that you have. So, with everything that's going on right now in the world with people's mental health challenges, physical health challenges, what are 3 things you would recommend, Dr. Portia Rawles, for an individual to do to take control of their mental health?
Go see a therapist. Don't allow stigma or embarrassment or shame or any of those factors. But if you're having some mental health challenges, seek out someone in your community that you can connect with. And I always say therapists is like a pair of shoes. You got to find one that fits. So the first one that you come may not be a good fit from you. Doesn't mean they're a bad therapist. Doesn't mean anything's wrong with you. They're just not a good fit. But keep searching until you find someone. If you know a mental health person or someone in the field, ask them, because mental health providers tend to know who really are excellent therapists and who might need some more development. I'll put it that way. Okay. So that's what I would ask. Also, trying to connect. COVID really put a lot of us in social isolation, and I think now we're having to be more intentional about connecting with family and friends or just people that we use the term tribe, but whoever you feel that you jive with, trying to be very intentional about making those connections on a regular basis. I know for myself that has been most helpful in the last several in this time. Just really being very intentional about that. I think that would be very helpful for our mental health. And whatever that whole self care thing of exercise, and I don't mean you got to go to the gym or anything, about whatever physically you have to do to get moving, whatever that means for you. If it's working in the garden, taking a walk, cutting grass, whatever that may be. Okay, doing something like that. I just think that makes such a big difference. Even though I'm no longer in the fire service, I still work out. I don't work out as intensely as I did when I was in the fire service, but I still, try to keep myself active because I can tell the difference when I'm not active.
Yeah, you sure can. No, those are really fabulous. Thank you, Dr. Portia Rawles. Where can people find you on the web? And just to give them a reference point for you.
Okay, so they can go to my practice website, which is rawlespsych.com. And you can click and find everything about me. You can reach out. Actually, there's a way to email me, and those emails, they go to my office manager. But if you're trying to get in touch with me, she's going to send it straight to me. Or you can email me at Saybrook. You can go on our website to the university's website to find me as well.
Always appreciate the plug for Saybrook. So Rawls Psych, Rawls with an E.com. Is that correct? And then saybrook.edu. You can find Portia there. All right. Dr. Rawls, it has been awesome having you on. We're going to have you back for sure.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
I'm a broken record, but I'm going to say it again. I could have gone 2 or 3 hours. Our producer, Phil, would not allow it, and rightfully so. We could, run the tape forever on this one, but she was just outstanding. Really appreciated her. I hope you enjoyed Dr. Rawls as much as I did. Remember her 3 major takeaways. Get to a therapist. Don't allow mental health stigma or shame to be a barrier. Ask for referrals if you need help, but definitely connect with a therapist. Next, connect with other humans, being intentional about connecting with those family and friends that you jive with. And then lastly, and as importantly, self-care. Most importantly, get out there, get moving, not just exercise. I like how she put it. Go mow the lawn, go in the garden, get out, move, get up and do. If you want to see the video elements that we have created, Mr. Phil, our producer, has done a fabulous job. Please visit our Saybrook YouTube page. If you'd like to support the podcast, of which Phil of podcasting fame has also been a tremendous contributor to helping us move this forward, go to Apple iTunes and leave a 5-star rating and review and subscribe so you can get episodes as they come out. If you're on Spotify, leave that 5-star rating and make sure to follow us. You can, of course, subscribe to us on most major podcast platforms, including Google, Stitcher, Pandora, and others. Remember to check our show notes for information on Dr. Rawles, including links to her website, books, and the like. For more about our clinical psychology program or the university, go to www.saybrook.edu. Click on areas of study at the top of the page and locate the program to learn more. Or simply Google Saybrook University Clinical Psychology Program. We need therapists. We need you. So check us out, please. All right, everyone. Take care. Be well.